Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cast of Kings, an unofficial recap podcast about the HBO original series House of the Dragon. I'm David Chen, and I have not read Fire and Blood, the book on which House of the Dragon is based.
And I'm Kim Renfro, and I have read Fire and Blood, the book upon which House of the Dragon is based.
Every week on this podcast, we recap, spoil, and discuss this episode of House of the Dragon that just aired. This week, we'll be recapping and spoiling Season 1, Episode 7, Driftmark. We will not spoil anything from future week's episodes. That includes anything on the Next Time on preview or anything from the books. You can find more of our episodes at acastofkings.com. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/acastofkings and also on TikTok at tiktok.com/@acastofkings. You can always email us at acastofkings@gmail.com or find us on Twitter as well at acastofkings. So we are talking about Season 1, Episode 7 of House of the Dragon, Driftmark. As usual, Kim Renfro, let's start with overall thoughts on this episode. What'd you think?
I'm continuing my trend of just loving it. I again was curious to see like what they were going to do with the time jump in this episode or how much time would pass. And I like that this is like pretty much one 24-hour period, it seems like, that a lot happens in. And so it was kind of cool to see that like awkward family funeral dynamic play out in this Westerosi culture. So much cool stuff with dragons happening in this episode, ramping up of violence, Daemon and Rhaenyra. I've been waiting for this episode ever since I think it was our very first episode of A Cast of Kings this season where you were like, yeah. So it's like they're clearly setting up that like Daemon and Rhaenyra are the opposing teams, our enemies, teams. The opposing teams, and I was like, yeah, very, very interesting. I wonder.
Kim has the best poker face. It's actually incredible, honestly. I'm actually quite impressed with how good the poker face is, because there's been so many times when she's, I've said something that basically is extremely silly in the broader context of what ends up happening, and Kim has said nothing. And that is what I have asked her to do, and she's done a great job of that. So in terms of not spoiling stuff, I should point out, I obviously want Kim's insights and opinions on things. So anyway,
what do you think? Yes. What are your overalls?
My overall thought.
What are your overalls, David Chen?
Yes, my overall thoughts are I quite like this episode. This episode takes place seemingly within a week after within 2 weeks after last episode, right? There's a funeral that goes on for Laena, who died last episode. So very short amount of time has passed. And as you pointed out, it is really cool that this episode takes place basically within a 24-hour period. That was fairly rare for like Game of Thrones to have an episode that took place in a 24-hour period, so you really can kind of get to see some of these character dynamics, interpersonal dynamics play out in a cool way. I really loved the scene in the Driftmark lobby, antechamber, whatever, the hall, the Great Hall, wherever it is, where like all the characters gather. It's rare to see all the characters like gather like that. I mean, we did see it in the wedding scene a couple weeks ago where there's a ton of characters in one location, but then everything just felt so unpredictable and tense there. It felt like anything could escalate, anything could happen.
Yeah.
And that's just really well done in terms of storytelling, filmmaking, in my opinion. I really enjoyed the ending. I know the ending was a great shock to many book readers, but for me as a show watcher, it just played like a really well executed montage. And I really liked, what it was doing and what it was saying about Rhaenyra. I do still have some qualms, still have some kind of remnant issues from last week that I will try to limit in terms of my conversation with this episode. But overall, I really was a fan of this episode and certainly enjoyed it much more than last week's episode. So anyway, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
The episode begins with a funeral at Driftmark. It's Laena that is being put to rest. And this scene was really cool. I just have to say, like, the way the production design, the way they kind of show you the rituals that occur at Driftmark, you get the sense that this is not the first time something like this has been done. Lena's sea casket, which looks like it's made of stone, and just kind of the speech that is being given, the eulogy, whatever it's called, it's all just it all plays off as like a really honorable way to kind of put this person to rest, and visually very interesting. What do you think of the funeral at Driftmark?
Yeah, as sad as I was to see that Laena pretty much came and went in a single episode, at least the adult version of Laena, I appreciated that this episode gives so much breathing space to the fact that that death was really tragic. You see, exactly as you said, sort of like the ceremony, all of the High Valyrian speech. We get a reference to the Merling King, who in Fire and Blood, they say that the Driftwood throne, which is that throne made out of driftwood, is in Lord Corlys's chamber. Like that throne, according to legend, was gifted to the Valyrians by the Merling King. So we get like cool little sprinkles of religious references. It's also funny because I looked it up. The Merling King is the name of the ship that in Game of Thrones Littlefinger used to smuggle Sansa out of King's Landing after Joffrey's death. So just fun little those little, I love when like my little sensors go off with like, wait a second, that was a thing to this other thing. So fun little details built in there. I love that, of course, Daemon is the one who laughs at a funeral, like classic.
But also he's like the only one for which it would be even remotely socially acceptable to laugh at that funeral, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, Otto is there. He's hand to the king. And you know he's hand because he looks down at his little hand pin and kind of like gives it a little tap, to reaffirm that it's still there. Yeah.
He's feeling himself at this funeral.
So it does feel like Larys's gambit has paid off, right? Like we can fill in the blanks that Viserys called Otto in the interim and brought him back. So
interesting that Viserys has failed to acquire a single other trusted ally in the last 10 years who he might possibly put back into this position.
Yes. I mean, I think we could use the phrase, it's interesting that nothing has happened around a blank topic in the last 10 years for a lot of different things, but we're not going to. Okay. We see the dragons flying over the Castle High Tide, and we see for the first time, I think, 5 dragons on screen at once.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. It makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, of course, all the dragons would be there because everyone would some people would fly to be there. They're not going to leave the dragons at home. They're not going to leave the Porsche at home. They're going to take that thing to the place that they're going to, of course.
Yeah, the nuclear bomb Porsche is coming with them to the
It's part Porsche, part nuclear bomb. They're not going to leave that at home. Of course, they're going to bring it with them.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw 5, and then you can assume that Vhagar is off screen at some point. So this is like 6 dragons that have all gathered for this funeral. And in the book, there's a sort of mention that like Driftmark almost felt like the old Valyrian times once again, because this was the highest number of dragons that had been like collected around a single space in a very long time. So yeah, I'm pretty sure there's 5 total dragons. So it's like you assume that probably Daemon brought Caraxes, Rhaenyra on Syrax, Laenor's dragon is Sea Smoke, Rhaenys, who's Laenor and Laena's mother, the queen who never was, her dragon is Meleys, and then I think that the 5th dragon is probably supposed to be either Aegon or Bela or Helena's dragons, but I'm not sure because we haven't seen those ones up close yet in the show, but hopefully we will soon.
So then there is this wake, right, at this castle. And all the families meeting together. And I believe this was like the first scene that was ever filmed with all these actors.
Yeah.
According to the after the episodes information. And I do think it did feel a little bit awkward to me. But I was cool with it because I felt like this is the kind of awkwardness that ensues whenever you bring family members together in a big way that they're not usually used to being together. Of course, there's all these like pre-existing relationships and thoughts and feelings, and they're all going to collide in this weird and awkward way. And so I felt like any awkwardness was completely intentional on the part of the show.
Yeah.
A bunch of different interactions going on here. I don't know which ones you feel are worth highlighting, Kim, but we did get one of the things I did enjoy was like Rhaenyra walking in and then Alicent kind of just giving her the stink eye. Like that was funny because obviously they're still not on good terms. Helena, who is Alicent's daughter,
yes,
is playing with a spider, right? Is that right?
Yeah, so she is once again kind of speaking in this like cryptic rhyme. And yeah, I had to poker face myself last week, because in episode 6, basically the same thing happened where like we see Helena and she's just sort of like talking to herself. She said, she referenced the fact that Aemond was going to lose an eye when Aemond and Alicent are talking about the fact that he doesn't have a dragon yet. Helena said he'll have to close an eye. And it was like, okay, what the hell does that mean? And then in this episode, you see that the trade-off for him claiming Vhagar was the fact that he loses an eye. So yeah, she's saying something else in this episode where now I'm like, okay, what prophecy or like dragon dream is that referencing? She says, quote, hand turns loom, spool of green, spool of black, dragons of flesh weaving dragons of thread, end quote. So decipher that as you will.
I mean, as a book reader, have you deciphered it already? Like, do you know what it is?
No, but I haven't tried very hard because I didn't want to get ahead of myself here. Just laying that out.
Either way,
there.
It seems like Helena can like somehow tell the future, right?
Yes, we're getting told that she is effectively a dragon dreamer, which is what King Viserys is, where they have these sort of like prophetic dreams, and she's being treated by her brothers like she's a weirdo because of it, instead of like, oh, that's a pretty sweet asset to have in the family. But
I don't think they fully put together that they
that she's actually predicting the future.
That she's predicting the future yet, but
true.
All they see is a budding entomologist, and they're disappointed by that for some reason. But yeah, so Aegon, who is the older one,
yes,
the older son of Alicent, blonde. Yeah. Talking to Aemond, the younger son of Alicent, also blonde.
Yes.
They kind of joke about marrying their sister, and Aemond is like, I would do it. I would do it to make the Valyrian bloodline pure. Aegon, meanwhile, is getting completely lit at this funeral, basically. So
yeah. Oh. Zelda again.
For those who are watching the YouTube version, a little cameo from Kim's cat on the video stream. But Kim, any other interactions in the funeral wake that you want to mention?
I thought it was sweet to see Rhaenyra like encourage her boy Jace, the oldest, to go comfort Daemon's daughters, Baela and Rhaena. Presumably they haven't met until this family gathering, because we're supposed to believe that Daemon and Rhaenyra haven't seen each other in 10 years since that welcome wedding feast in episode 5. But they seem to have like bonded pretty quickly to each other, and they sort of like, I kind of remember that from my days of like the family functions. Like you sort of meet your cousins and become BFFs with them within like 24 hours if you're the only kids hanging around. So that was a sweet little moment. Also, like young Luke saying that he doesn't want to inherit Driftmark because if he does, that means everybody's dead. And I'm like, these kids are getting into it early of like of understanding like the danger and the sacrifice that is involved with having to be the ruling class of this country.
Luke is Rhaenyra's brown-haired son.
Yeah.
Right. And therefore, technically, Lord Corlys's grandson. And that's why he would be the inheritor of Driftmark.
Yes, because he's the second born child of the future queen, basically. So his inheritance is going to be Driftmark, because that is that's supposed to be Laenor Valerian's inheritance, his quote unquote father.
Yeah, and the idea is Rhaenyra's firstborn would be the king, the future king.
So Jaceres, who they call Jace, her firstborn son, also brown-haired boy, little mop. He was so cute in this episode. Like that whole like, I'm hiding my eyes because I'm becoming an angsty teen haircut that he has going on. Very cute.
Also, you pointed out on Twitter, or you retweeted someone on Twitter saying like big Jon Snow energy with like, I don't want it, like, which is what Luke says, right?
Yeah.
Luke, Rhaenyra's child, says, I don't want it, which is the same thing that Jon Snow said when he was deemed to be the inheritor. Here's something that confused me, Kim, was during the episode, Aegon and Aemond are talking, and then I think it was one of them says, that's your future queen over there, speaking about Helena.
Oh, yeah, good catch.
So that was a little confusing, because I'm like, wait, are they assuming that Aegon is eventually going to be king and
That's what Alicent has been telling Aegon.
So that statement is made with the assumption that Alicent is right about Aegon eventually being the heir, right?
Yeah, no, totally. Not to mention, I think that it shows that they are treating incest as a very casual thing between them of like, I'm going to marry my sister and produce children with her, presumably. I think kind of shows a little bit of the hypocrisy of like, so Alicent thinks it's completely vile and gross that Rhaenyra and Daemon might have coupled or whatever, and yet like here she is as a grown woman and she's fully fine with teaching her sons that it is their duty to marry, for one of them to marry their sister eventually and have heirs.
There is a scene where Laenor is standing at the high tide crying instead of being at the wake, and then Corlys says to Carl, "Retrieve your patron." He's very upset about it. What is going on here? Why is I guess Laenor is upset because his sister's dead, and they believe to have a close relationship, right? And so that's very reasonable.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's any ideas of like what's going on with this sequence? Like,
I thought it was interesting that like so many other people seem to like clock this exchange and be talking about it. It like I think seems to be one more example of the way that gossip is probably spreading around the realm. Like Corlys so obviously referring to Carl's like patron meaning that's a person who pays you to stick around, right? So I think it was like a slight dig at the idea that like Carl is no more than like a hired boyfriend for the king consort. And Laenor's like standing in the water, clearly like wasted. I think Corlys just wanted Laenor to stop embarrassing himself in front of people, but the way that he went about it actually just brought more attention to the fact that Laenor and Carl were there. So I think that it's good stage setting for the fact that they both are going to want to escape by the end of the episode and rid themselves of like the sort of facade that they have going on of like, oh, you're simply my like, good pal who just happens to come around with me everywhere.
There is a conversation between Viserys and Daemon as well. And I guess these brothers have been through a lot at this point. But what I do get a sense of is collegiality between these two at this point. There's no longer the kind of open warfare and enmity that obviously was in the earlier episodes of the show. Anything you want to highlight about that interaction?
I just think Viserys is a little flip-flopping man who can't figure out if he wants to like extend the olive branch or punish Daemon. And yeah, I guess Daemon makes it through this episode without being banished again. But like this, I almost thought it was funny that like Viserys is like, oh, we're like every other episode now I'm gonna have a nice conversation with you. Now I'm gonna get pissed again. Like Viserys, I think just can't. Viserys seems to have a really hard time sticking to a decision and like following through on that. And like, yes, you can assume that after 10 years, things might have softened between them. Viserys is clearly like doing way worse with his health. But yeah, I was just like, man, you really can't not give Daemon like third, fourth, fifth, sixth chances here to like be around and be a part of the family.
Certainly he's not going to do anything that's going to interfere with the line of succession in any way. Anything else about the funeral wake? We see Otto kicking the crap out of Aegon and
messed up. I don't agree with Otto and Alicent's
Kim is not a believer in corporal punishment. I don't know if you guys can't tell.
Even in medieval times, man, you really got to slap around like who you believe is going to be the future king. Like you think that's the best way to handle this? Not great. The only other thing I don't think I noticed until I watched it a second time is that Viserys calls Alicent Emma on his way out from the party, and I was like, ooh, like now he's having memory like ish. Like I like couldn't tell. I'm like, are they implying that he's starting to like literally untether from his current reality, or like was it just a Freudian slip thing of like he's thinking about his first wife? But that was a pretty like the way that Sir Harold, who's the current captain of the Kingsguard, gently tries to like correct him without correcting him by being like, should I see after Queen Alicent, your current wife? Should I see after her?
Yes.
And then
I do think it was the next statement I'm about to say has nothing to do with time jumps. I do think it's a bit of a cheat what the show did in episode 5 and the transition to episode 6. Like Viserys collapsing at the end of episode 5, like the next the show language, filmmaking language is the next episode that guy is either dead or he's on a deathbed. So the idea that he is still alive and well, like it's no longer a thing I feel I can track. I guess you do see him losing body parts throughout the course of the season, so that is like a way you can kind of track his decline. But yeah, it was an interesting touch because he otherwise seems completely lucid in this episode, right?
Yeah, and I think so. This is something that I was also kind of wondering about, like why they show him sort of deteriorating so much in episode 5. I've traced it back to that conversation that Otto and Alicent have, right? Where before he leaves, when he gives her like one final lecture about like, if you don't understand now that you are in danger and that your children are in danger, like I give up, basically. You know, he kind of like put this fear in her that not only her life, but that the life of her children are at risk the moment Viserys dies, because that's when the line of succession question is going to snap into effect, right? And he says something to her of like, it might be weeks or it might be months, but like the king is going to die. And then you see her see Viserys collapse multiple times. And so I think that that is supposed to be letting us know that she is like, she has put herself in a state of constant fear that Viserys might die any moment. And then we jump ahead and it's like, okay, so for 10 years, you've been thinking like, this might be it. This might be the time that he goes. So it's like, she's been on edge, ready to try and defend her children from the sword, even though that's like a made up threat, right? Like Otto, like, I don't think that Rhaenyra at any point in the last 10 years has seriously thought to herself, well, the second my dad dies, I'm going to have to go murder those kids over there. But that's what Alicent thinks Rhaenyra might be thinking at every moment. So that's my only like, that's the only reason why I think they might be kind of going a little hard on the fact that Viserys is deteriorating without doing what you said, which is like, if you're showing him collapsing, especially as like the cliffhanger to an episode, it tracks that he would be dead or dying in the next episode, but he's hanging on, and Alicent is getting more and more unraveled by the day, I think because of that.
I think that is a little bit of a reach, but I buy it. I buy it, and it's really good insight, Kim. So I'm being 100%. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm like, no. I don't know that like a casual viewer might like put that all together, but I think you put it together very, very beautifully. So,
and I think that is again part of the rub of like the way that they're trying to seed things in, because even I explained last week, in the background they show the maester switch, and in the book it's explained that because a new maester has taken over, like Viserys is able to live longer effectively because this new maester has different treatments for whatever ailment he's giving. They did not try and explain that at all in the episode. They just hoped that you would pick up on the fact that it's a different maester there, and that that's the maester who a few episodes ago like suggested a new poultice for his grace. And like, so you're right that it is like, you have to like be doing
you have to really like put the pieces together. Yeah. And you know, and it's not necessarily bad for a show to ask that of the audience, right? Like, there are some shows like, here's another show, Dark, the Netflix original series. You really gotta work. You really gotta work to watch Dark, in my opinion. You gotta have like a freaking worksheet with all the character faces and everything on it to really understand that show. But that doesn't make it a bad doesn't make it a bad show, you know, just because you got to do some work for it. So
yeah, I'll send you my like 100-page Google Doc of notes for Dark. That was the most challenging show to try and unwind. So yeah, it happens.
Conversation between Corlys and Rhaenys. Rhaenys is not happy that Daemon rebuffed Laena's desire to return to Westeros. Implies that they had better maesters here, you know, that would have been able to help Laena with her birth. There was something you wanted to point it out here that was different from the book, right, Kim?
Yeah, well, Laena's death in general was different, played out differently in the show than it happens in the books. In the book, she actually does make it back to Westeros, and her and Rhaenyra like are said to have been really close, and that there's like an explanation that they basically like try and have different maesters help her through the childbirth, but that ultimately fails. And she winds up in the book. They say that she died like on the stairs, basically, while trying to get to Vhagar, not so that she could be self-immolated, or like, you know, via her dragon emulated. But because she wanted to ride her one last time before she died.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Immolated, by the way.
Immolated.
Yeah.
What did I even say?
You were saying immolated or something like that?
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for saving me from myself.
Yeah, no problem, Kim. So they have a conversation that's very similar to the one that you watch Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
What is that? It's a yes or no question, Kim.
I watched most of it. I think that there's some season in the middle where I didn't see all those episodes, and then I came back in for that.
Spoilers? Can I spoil the ending of Breaking
please.
Bad? I'm going to spoil the ending of Breaking Bad, but there's a scene at the whole time Walter White is saying that he's doing all these horrible things for his family, quote unquote.
Right.
And then at the very end of the show, his wife is like, please stop saying you're doing this for your family. And then he finally, in the final episode, I think, of the show, he's like, I did it for me. And that's basically the conversation that Corlys and Rhaenys have in this scene where he's like, I just want what's best for my children. And she's like, please stop saying you want what's best for your family. Like, you want what's best for you. And they have a frank conversation about the fact that his grandchildren are not actually his legitimate grandchildren. They actually are not connected by blood to him at all. Which leads him to make the statement, history does not remember blood, it remembers names, end quote. And he kind of like breaks away from Rhaenys. And I think the point that he's making is it doesn't matter if they are not related to me by blood. It just matters that we all have the same name and that history remembers our name. And you wrote in the show notes, that's pretty progressive. Hey, good job, Corlys.
Yeah. I think that he has a point, and I think that it also helps highlight the fact that it's really Alicent and Kristen who seem intent on like keeping the conversation going about the fact that Rhaenyra's children are bastards. I feel like every single other person in that cast in the Red Keep would probably be happy to like feign ignorance for the rest of their lives.
Right,
and
like they're all invested in this fiction, basically, right? Like
yeah.
it is to their advantage to believe the fiction, right?
Yeah, and so. I can see why, especially last episode, that seemed like a big mistake on Rhaenyra's on Rhaenyra's behalf, right? That like her choice to have these children, to have more than one child out of wedlock, has put her and her children in danger, and like the whole line of succession in danger. But then, as we see in this episode, like her and Laenor did try apparently to have children of their own. And once you have that piece of information, then I think Corlys's point kind of is even better, because it's like they're the ones that got Laenor in that situation, knowing, like Rhaenys knew for sure based on a conversation that we saw them have, that Laenor was not sexually interested in women. And like, what do you think's going to happen when you put a gay man as future king consort? Like, I think that there was always this risk that he might not produce children of his own blood with Rhaenyra. And Corlys seemed to have like accepted that and immediately moved on to like, well, fine, we're going to treat these boys as our own. Whereas Rhaenys is now having an issue with it. And it's like, I feel like Laenor and Rhaenyra were in a little bit of a lose-lose situation there, because they needed to have heirs. Like, that's the whole question of the line of succession, is about having multiple generations being prepared at the same time for the line of succession, right? They couldn't go 10 years without having a kid. That would have once again put her claim at risk. So
there is a scene on the beach between Daemon and Rhaenyra where they basically catch up on the last 10 years and kind of reveal a lot of the information that you just covered about trying to have a kid. There was no joy in it. And Rhaenyra did get a lot of comfort from Sir Harwin. We get a little bit more of that relationship and what that must have been like. If I am to if I'm to try to argue in favor of the time jumps, I think this is kind of one area where I kind of try to explore it in my head a little bit, because on last week's episode I put forward the possibility, they should have just done a whole season with these actors and kind of and they could have referred to stuff that happened in the past via monologues or dialogue or whatever. And here's a scene where I feel like, that probably wouldn't have worked out very well. Like, if the story is that Daemon and Rhaenyra haven't met in 10 years, then seeing that past interaction play out on screen is really critical to understanding what their relationship might be like at present state.
Mm-hmm.
However, like they didn't have to tell the story in that way. Like they could have told it in such a different way where, I don't know, they're writing letters to each other or some other way of them knowing each other in the last 10 years that gives you some more context for that relationship.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I guess like as I was watching the scene, I was like, this is one of the strongest kind of scenes in favor of a time jump and or different actors playing it, is like without the context of the Daemon Rhaenyra story in the past,
Mm-hmm.
this romance obviously happens like extremely suddenly, and it's asking you to buy a lot. It's asking you to buy that like she'd be attracted to her uncle and that they would rekindle this long lost love that they had for each other, and that just doesn't work,
Yeah.
in my opinion, unless you have either more time with these two characters in their relationship in present day or in the past.
Mm-hmm.
All that said, it does still happen quite suddenly in this episode. What do you think of how it played out, Kim?
Yeah, I think it was very interesting that she just straight up like called him out on like in her opinion, abandoning her as a child, like not only after that first sexual encounter that they had, but then after, like, presumably in the middle of that, like they were about to make out on the dance floor when the chaos broke out at the wedding feast, and then presumably Daemon just vanished.
Yeah, he just pieced out and never came back ever again, I guess.
Never came back, didn't presumably check up on her, see how she was doing, just like assumed that she would be fine. And I mean, she mostly was. It seems like she had a decent life in the last 10 years. But I think that this episode is when you see exactly where all of the lines are being drawn between people, and it's very obvious why she views Daemon as not only like a personal comfort to her, but as a very, very powerful, strong ally in what she now understands is going to be like a bloody, and like this is when first blood is drawn, right, in this episode, literally, between the two families. And I think that, exactly to your point, like the last 6 episodes have shown us very clearly how effective Daemon is at violence and like and commanding that level of like power that not very many people have in the realm, of like the way that Targaryens are sort of viewed as almost godlike, above the law type of people. Like Daemon and Rhaenyra are creating their own little like modern family of, I don't know, aggressive and progressive Targaryens.
Yeah. I am curious to see how the Daemon personality is going to play out, because I think he's, in my opinion, extremely different than when we last saw him, right? He was full of fire and piss and vinegar, in the first 5 episodes of the show. And now it calmed down extremely. We described it last episode as he had a tough 20s and he's now in his calmer, more subdued 30s. You describe him in the show notes this week as he's in his post-grad era. He like has already found himself, like he knows what he's all about. And so I do hope that, I think to its credit, the show has done a good job of showing us a different Daemon than what we had in the first 5 episodes. Like this is a very different character. And I hope that as the episodes evolve, that the character doesn't just go back to his old ways, that we see some conflict between what we are seeing now and then what we have seen in the first 5 episodes, right?
Yeah.
To me, that will be the mark of like successfully pulling off this character transition from old Daemon to new Daemon. So, okay, they have sex on the beach in a conveniently placed tent.
I know.
That happens to be there.
That little wooden structure.
Super convenient. Seems to have like some like flaps and coverings and stuff like that already. It's amazing. It's amazing. Maybe not the first time that it's been used for this purpose. But anyway, they have sex, and I don't know if there's anything else we have to say about that topic.
Aside from the fact that the fact that they've shown us Rhaenyra's 2 seemingly like tender and sweet sex scenes with Christian and Cole, and now Daemon is so, and we've seen both of her weddings, and we have seen none of those scenes for Alicent. right? So
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that was striking to me about this was like, oh, they're really giving you a much more direct insight into Rhaenyra's relationships and how they operate in private, whereas we aren't seeing a ton of that for Alicent. And I think that that's intentional
Mm-hmm.
because this
Mm-hmm.
episode really pushes Alicent into antagonist territory.
Mm-hmm. Debatable, but um,
Fair?
hashtag team Allison. But no, I will say I think it's clearly positioning the show and the show watchers to kind of sympathize with Rhaenyra. Like it's showing
Yeah.
you most things are mostly from her perspective. So I would agree with that notion. There's a scene when Aemond shows up on the beach, seemingly looking for Vhagar. This is the part of the episode that I thought was like could have been better set up. Yes, we got a little bit of last week where Aemond is being tortured by the kids and he has this fascination with dragons and he like wants a dragon for himself. Like we get all that, but there was like no setup for this scene where no, I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there was a scene at the funeral wake where they're like, "Hey, did you see Vhagar? He's sitting over there on those hills over there." And Aemon's like, like there's nothing where like they set up that like this might be a thing that he's doing.
We see
Um,
him hear a dragon roar. There's like a
mm,
shot of him kind of like
I see.
looking up at the sky and the sun like moves behind the castle and then you like hear a little
Got it.
dragon roar in the distance and he seems kind of curious by it and
Okay.
then like wanders off. But you're right that they didn't really for how serious this scene is about like the
Yes.
danger of dragon riding and the danger and like the what it takes to claim a dragon, we just kind of had to watch all that and pick up on it in real time. There wasn't like the like, oh man, now that Lena's dead, who's gonna possibly claim Vhagar or like
I love, I love, I love the Kim Renfro impressions. But yes, there's nothing like that. There's no like who's going to claim Vhagar. There's no here's how difficult it is to mount Vhagar. There's no Aemon being like, I should go check out Vhagar.
yeah.
It's a little odd. And as a result, I had no idea what the f is going on in this scene. For a while until he like gets to the dragon and then like starts riding it and I mean, Kim Renfro, how difficult is it for someone to typically claim a dragon in this way?
I would say very hard, especially one as large and full grown as Vhagar. Like you see that Aemond was on the verge of being.
Is it more difficult than trying to handle a cat while you're recording a podcast, which is what you're doing right now?
Yes, I'm actually very good at handling my cat while recording a podcast. My little beast. Um, she claimed me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very challenging, very risky. Literally, if you do not have Targaryen blood, it's all but a sure death sentence. We've seen in the A Song of Ice and Fire books, there's a character, Quentin Martell, who doesn't exist in the show, who tried and failed spectacularly to ride one of Dany's dragons. So yeah, it's very hard. I think it shows he's got a lot of balls on this little kid. Like the way that he really stood his ground. He's using Valyrian phrases. The one that he says up front, Dohaires, means serve. So like he's basically like staring this giant ancient dragon in the face and saying like, serve me. I'm a 10-year-old kid.
Mm-hmm.
But he pulls it off. Climbs up. I love like the I was like, how the
the
hell
ropes, like that was
yeah.
really cool. That's a cool touch, right?
Yeah, that she has like a whole like rope ladder, basically like that she is just on her back at all times so that he can climb up there. Gave me a lot of vibes of How to Train Your Dragon. Have you seen those
Mm-hmm.
movies?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes,
love
yes,
I
yes, I
love
have.
those movies.
Yeah.
And yeah, the whole like test flight. There's a really good test like a scene where Hiccup, the character in How to Train Your Dragon, tries riding his dragon for the first time and it's very scary and dangerous, and then as soon as it starts working, like you sense that exhilaration. And I think the same thing happened in this episode, right, where like you see that Aemond is like about to lose his grip at any moment. It's very chaotic, but then like once they get in the zone, he's riding a gigantic destructive magical creature, and he did it all on his own. And so now dragons can only be bound to one rider at a time. And so it's like now nobody else is going to be able to ride Vhagar as long as Aemond maintains his claim over her.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in reality, if this is a real thing, you'd want to have some kind of dragon security after. It's like if a nuclear weapon can only be bonded to one person, you'd want to have some kind of nuclear weapon security after like the person dies and anyone else can bond to it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. I think that, and again, I'm just reaching, but I'm like, you can see that it was a very unexpected thing. Like it's not every day that somebody just decides that they're
Mm-hmm.
gonna risk their life to claim a dragon, and I don't think anybody expected it of Aemond, and I think he
Right.
kind of knows that. That's why he comes back all like swaggy and confident afterwards, because you can see that he's like, oh yeah, I just did that. Like
Yeah.
nobody here thought I would do that.
And I guess like the pool of people who might possibly do it is pretty limited, right?
Yeah.
It's not like there's like a million people that are waiting to climb on the dragon. It's like there's maybe like 20 that might
Right.
even be able to. So maybe maybe they reallocate the security budget elsewhere for that one.
Yeah. And there's an element of like disrespect to it, right? Like maybe they didn't think that they had to send anyone to guard Vhagar because it wouldn't occur to the Valerians that one of Alicent's kids would dare take
Yes.
Laena's dragon when they literally just finished burying her like a few hours ago, man. Didn't even wait.
Yeah. Yeah. So the kids start fighting because Aemond shows up, and Laena's children immediately realizes what's happened. Aemond has stolen one of the dragons that was theoretically could have been meant for one of them.
Mm-hmm.
A huge fight ensues. And Jace and Luce also show up. So Aemond again is Alicent's child. Jace, he's the blonde one. Jace and Luce are the brown-haired ones. They are Rhaenyra's children. They show up. Basically, a massive fight ensues, and Aemond's eye is permanently damaged. Or destroyed, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen scenes in movies and TV shows of kids fighting. Like this is not an uncommon trope. But what I appreciate is that we get the Game of Thrones universe take on this. And in this universe, like the kids are playing for keeps. Like something terrible could happen at any time. And in fact, that's exactly what occurs. You then see the eye getting sewn up later. It looks horrible. Like his face looks horrible and very damaged by it. And it's clear that, yeah, this is a tragedy that has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of have this big fight in the hall where Alicent says, I'm literally going to take an eye for an eye, and there's an escalating series of things that occur. But I actually really love this whole between the beach fight and then in the Great Hall and them arguing with each other, and how that felt again so tense and unpredictable and escalating, like anything could happen.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk through some more details, but Kim, any thoughts on these sequences?
Yeah, I mean, whoever did the Foley work for that fight between the kids, like the sound when Aemon's fist like connected with every single one of those kids, I was like, oh my god, he's punching them really hard. This is not like a little slap fight between kids. Like
Yeah.
you felt the viciousness, and then as soon as Aemond escalated it to like when he like has Luke by the throat and then picks up a rock, I was like, oh, he's out. Like he could kill one of these boys right now. And both of those boys, as far as the realm is concerned, are like, or at least for
Are in the line of succession,
Jace,
right?
yeah. Jace is next in line. Like it's bananas that he went as far as he did. And you felt that danger. And so then when you see, the pocket sand knife to the face move, like you kind of understand that they are truly defending themselves from their former peer and friend who like now might actually murder them. And so like it reminded me in season 1 of Game of Thrones when you see the fight between Arya and Joffrey, and like we, the audience, get to see what really happened and like the cruelty that was on display there from Joffrey. And then that moves into like trying to explain to the adults what happened, and it just becomes a big like he said, she said situation, with the similar chaos of like we can kind of get a sense for like what might be like the just response here. But as we see, Alicent has no interest in believing that her son might have been at fault here. And Rhaenyra goes straight into like, well, he called him a bastard, so like, let's get this all out in the air one more time, I guess. So I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, there's a lot of like little things that I really enjoyed about this scene. Kind of, I loved Daemon just kind of sitting there in the back, cool as a cucumber, just chilling, just He's not intervening. He knows that it's not his time to play his card in, and the only time he does intervene is to stop Sir Criston from going after Rhaenyra, which is, worth considering.
Yeah.
That's the only time when he felt it was worth stepping in.
Yeah. I also wasn't sure if Criston was headed for the kids. It's weird. He like goes around the group, and I was like, yeah, he probably is just trying to protect Alicent. But then it's like, there's also a chance that he was making this split decision to enact his queen's order of bringing him Lucerys's eye. And so,
I think it was, Alicent's like, hey, Sir Criston, I order you to take that kid's eye. And I think Sir Criston was having a bit of a crisis of conscience, because he's supposed to protect the queen, but that doesn't necessarily extend to him taking out kids' eyes, right?
No.
That was kind of,
total overreach of his powers, or like of her control in this situation. And he does not follow, I think smartly, doesn't do exactly what she says. But it's like, you also see Viserys and Sir Harold, who's the captain of the Kingsguard, they both clock that as like, oh, this relationship between Alicent and Criston is probably more inappropriate than we have realized, or like the loyalty here is crossing a line, right?
Yes. He's not just doing his duty anymore. He is,
right. Which again, I have a wide understanding of Alicent and Criston's behaviors, but like they seem to be getting more hypocritical the older that they get, in terms of like what they decide is honorable and decent, is very easily moved around whenever they have a desire for action.
I will say that for all the challenges, and again, I just want people to understand, I'm like really making a conscious effort to kind of praise the things about the episode that I really like, and decisions that they've made that have gone against other sentiments I've had about the show in the past. But this was the scene that fully justified Olivia Cooke being in the role of Alicent, where she's like, I demand retribution, like I demand an eye. Like the way she does that is so chilling, and is so good that I'm like, oh wow, she really nailed it. Like in a way that I'm not saying who played Emily. It was
Emily Carey.
Emily Carey. I'm not saying Emily Carey couldn't have done that. But I think that Olivia Cooke really brought something to it that was special. And so to me, this was the first scene in the last 2 episodes that I'm like, oh wow, I totally get like why they wanted her to be in this role, because it's so good what she does with, like, you can tell how angry she is, and she's crossing a line, and she does it so brazenly, when she's like demanding the eye of this kid. Like it's a moral line that it's like, the relationship after this point is like irreparable. You have to imagine, right?
Yeah.
And so that's also like so many lines are being crossed in that scene, and I thought she just nailed that performance. So anyway.
Yeah, you really believe that she believes what she's saying is the most righteous and like just path forward, but like you get to see on everybody's faces that like you're crossing a line. And not only is she crossing a line, but like Viserys is like doing a pretty piss poor job of reining her in. And I think that that's emblematic of what their relationship has been like. In the last episode, when she tells him like, you can do whatever you want when I'm dead, like, you, in this realm, the king's word is final on all matters. Like she has gotten herself into a place of power within her rule as queen that is overstepping, but Viserys seems to have not done a single thing to try and like curb that building impulse of hers, right? To call the shots.
Speaking of Viserys, he tries to get the truth out of Aemond, right? Where did you hear this horrible lie, and why did you, theoretically, like, Rhaenyra's kids were accused of being bastards, and then that's why they struck him, and it was very insulting and terrible, right? For him to question their honor. So he's like, "Where did you hear this lie?" And then I think you're meant to be like, is he going to name Alicent? Because that would be very bad for Alicent if he does. But instead, he names Aemond, and he does that, I think. Well, why does he do that? Kim, you had a theory and perspective on why he names Aemond instead of Alicent in that situation.
Aegon.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Aegon.
Why Aemond?
Aemond says Aegon is the one who lied about the prince. I apologize, yes.
No, yeah. I think to me that read as, because you played that clip earlier and I was like, there's so much silence between the question and the
Yes.
answer, because you watch him, I felt like it seemed to me like you watch him know that it's his mother. Like, to your point earlier, where like apparently Alicent has been speaking to Aegon and Aemond about this enough to the point that they refer to Helena as the future queen, right? Like, it's pretty obvious that it came from Alicent. But I think that they exchange this look where Aemond decides, like, okay, if I actually say that right now, Viserys won't have any choice but to punish Alicent, right? And he clocks that and decides, okay, instead of throwing my mom under the bus, I'm going to throw my drunk older brother under the bus.
A juvenile can get his record expunged when he's 18, and so in Westeros as well. So yeah, it does seem to a good way to diffuse the tension. And then of course Aegon's like, look, we all know what's going on. Just look at them. And that's not something Alicent would have said, I don't think. So another way of getting the poisonous, toxic gossip out into the open as well. But I just loved when Aegon says, me? It's like it's like a very sitcom-y, like, me? Like
like he was so zoned out. Like, this has nothing to do. This has nothing to do with me. I just have to
I don't even know what's going on right now, man. Like, and it was hilarious, I thought.
Yeah.
So what else happens in the scene that's worth mentioning? Yeah, Alicent says like he gets to decide which eye to keep. The king is like, hey, look, let's just all put this behind us. And Alicent's like, no, that's not good enough. So then she's like, I'm going to take one eye as well. He gets to decide which eye to keep. Kristen won't go over and take the kid's eye out. So then she grabs the dagger, which is a special dagger, right? It's the same dagger that killed the Night King. Wow, this dagger certainly sees a lot of action throughout the course of Westeros history, huh?
Really does.
The cat's paw, right? Is what
it is? It's referred to as the cat's paw blade because that is the dagger that Joffrey used, that Joffrey provided an assassin with to go try and kill Bran Stark in Game of Thrones.
I see.
And so
it was Joffrey that did that? I thought it was like a Lannister that did, or one of the Lannisters that did that.
Joffrey is a Lannister.
No, I know, but like, sorry, no. One of the older, you're right. One of the older Lannisters, like Jaime or Cersei.
No, I think they don't really ever explain that super well, but in the books, Tyrion kind of puts two and two together that Joffrey probably overheard King Robert saying something about like, it would be a mercy just to kill the boy. And then Joffrey hired someone to try and like twistedly carry out King Robert's thoughts. Yeah.
Alicent lunges with a knife and then Rhaenyra stops her. And there's this moment when like the knife blade is like right at her eye and they kind of have this interaction, and then the knife eventually slashes open a huge portion of Rhaenyra's arm, and the scene basically ends at that point. I was a little bit annoyed that like at no point earlier in the scene did it come up that Aemond had claimed one of the dragons, like that was kind of the proximate cause of all this. But it seemed to be like a big reveal at the end, like, oh, that's what caused all this, But whatever. Like, at no point while they're stitching up his eye did they say like, hey, he was out claiming dragons and then they got into a fight. But whatever. Yeah, it's fine.
I really loved the dialogue here of Alicent kind of like finally losing her shit in front of everybody. And when she says like, what have I done but what was expected of me, and then they cut to like the knife point with like fire in the background, like at Rhaenyra's eye, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're reminding us that like Rhaenyra also feels bound to this obligation of this prophecy that her father told her of like, there has to be a Targaryen on the throne who has to carry out like this potential fight against the cold darkness coming for us all, whatever. So like, but Alicent doesn't know that side of why Rhaenyra is doing what she's doing. Alicent only sees herself. And when she says like, I've forever been upholding the kingdom, the family, the law, while you flout your duty as you please. So like, this is really Alicent is coming at this from a perspective of like, I've done everything that was asked of me, regardless of how awful it was. And she thinks that she's being villainized for it, or like being cut out of the proper line of succession and things that should happen because Rhaenyra's children aren't legitimate. Whereas Rhaenyra has flouted certain like norms and customs, but never out of like a cruelty, in my opinion. It seems to mostly have been out of just a personal desire for equality for what another heir to the throne would be able to do. And in this case, she did try, according to her, with Laenor. They both acknowledged that, like, they tried behind the scenes to do their duty as expected. So,
I mean, okay, that's a pretty pro Rhaenyra reading of things, in my opinion. But
yeah, what's your counter?
It's not. I think that's mostly accurate, but like the idea of like, yeah, Rhaenyra is just doing her best. Just is like, okay. I mean, yes, they tried, but it felt like they didn't try very hard based on the dialogue, and also like Rhaenyra did, uh, have this long-standing relationship with Harwin that we never really see in the course of the show, but like, like that she like stepped out of bounds in a really big way over an extremely extended period of time, over the course of many, many years. And so I just don't see Rhaenyra as kind of this beacon of virtue. I know I agree that in the Westeros universe, if a dude was doing this, like it would be people might not bat an eye in the same way that they do with Rhaenyra. But the idea that like Rhaenyra is has a duty and she's doing everything she can, I just don't. That does not jive with what I'm seeing on screen of Rhaenyra personally.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would never describe Rhaenyra as a beacon of virtue.
Sure.
Not even a little bit.
Fair enough. I apologize for the straw person argument then.
No, no, I think that you're right in that, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people that agree with you. The whole in Fire and Blood, Alicent and Rhaenyra are completely pitted against one another and like explained to be like having this like, I don't know, hysterical women cat fight type of thing. I think that the show is very intentionally letting us understand the different motivations that both Rhaenyra and Alicent have to be behaving the way that they're behaving. And it's all going terribly wrong. But we see Rhaenyra in private, like to Daemon, say like, I don't think Alicent is capable of cold-blooded murder. Like Rhaenyra still has some sort of sense of like regard for Alicent that is not reciprocated at all. Alicent only seems to want to talk about all of the terrible, unjust things that Rhaenyra is doing, when I don't think that Rhaenyra actually has, like the marriage proposal that Rhaenyra put forward last episode between Helena and Jace, from Alicent's perspective, that's like, oh, you want to keep my daughter hostage and like, completely tie our families to each other so that you can control all of them. I don't think that's what Rhaenyra actually had in mind. I think that she genuinely thought maybe we can salvage this. But they're just so beyond being able to communicate to one another their fears and their desires. And then this is the result, is that it's creating in-family strife that's being passed to their children.
It's like when you have that friend of yours that has basically a toxic relationship with someone else where they literally no longer have the ability to interpret any of their actions positively. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what Alicent is like with Rhaenyra. I will agree with you that I think that I think the show is making both of them out to be very sympathetic characters. I know people don't agree with them. They don't agree with that. Like people are much more pro Rhaenyra in overall, from what I can tell. But I think they're both tragic figures in their own way, and I don't see like Rhaenyra as that much more virtuous, if at all, than Alicent personally. But I
think I'm not interested in seeing either of them be virtuous, right?
Sure.
I'm interested in seeing how they each attempt to wield power when they're being given very little avenues to do so, right? And they're both going about it in very different ways. Alicent is trying to stay within the laws and customs of the country because that's how things have been done for centuries. And she's like the old school Faith of the Seven type of person who has like that moral code and structure. And Rhaenyra is kind of like freeballing everything. Like she seems to be trying to kind of make it up as she goes with what she's being given. She didn't ask to be made heir to the Iron Throne. She says at the beginning that she would be happy to ride around on her dragon with Alicent for the rest of her life and have freedom. So yeah, I think that the show, just because of the changes that they're making to Fire and Blood, it feels like the show is going heavy pro Rhaenyra when it comes to kind of like explaining how things unfold. But that doesn't mean that Alicent is a straight up villain. Like there are many, many reasons to sympathize what she went through as when she was younger and how that has all informed her survival instincts in the current timeline.
I agree with that. I do think you're right though, that the show is kind of positioning Alicent to be the villain. There is a scene with Otto and Alicent where Alicent's like, "What? Okay, Dad, let's get it all out. Like, what do you have to say about it?" And he's like, "Actually, good job back there." Like, he basically says, "Say what you will about the tenets of Alicent Hightower, but at least it's the ethos, Kim Renfro."
Sure.
He's basically saying like at least, hey, I now know that you know what it takes to be on top, basically, right?
Yeah, and like to me that's a big admission. Like when he says we play an ugly game and now I see you have the determination to win it. He's acknowledging that what they're doing is strategizing and putting pieces on the table and not acting out of some, divine moral code, but that their code dictates to them that this is what the right thing should be. And it's like the ends justify the means argument, right? Where Otto seems content to let Alicent maybe wreak a little bit more havoc if in the end they get what they want, which is her children on the Iron Throne, safe and on the Iron Throne.
He says we play an ugly game, as you said, Kim. Hey, Kim, do you know what the game is?
It does it have to do with? I think you say Thrones.
I think it might be a Game of Thrones.
Thrones.
That is the ugly game that they're playing. I don't know if you caught that. It's a little Easter egg for you guys. Okay, the ugly game, the game he's referring to, is the Game of Thrones.
You had to watch the episode 3 times to really pick up on that.
I mean, closer to 5+ for me personally.
Yeah.
Rhaenyra and Laenor have an interaction that's actually quite nice. I should have been there. Those should be our house words. That was pretty hilarious. Obviously, you get a sense of like the missed opportunities and connections that this family has had over the years. And I think Laenor, seeing the damage and the potential threats to the whole kingdom that occurred in the prior scene, or I guess he didn't even see them. He just saw the aftermath of them.
Yeah.
Right? Is like, okay, I gotta lean in to the family here, or else like things will go even more south. And so he says, I'm not going to go to war. I'm really going to invest in the family. I'm really going to be there for the kids. And he's basically trying to correct their old ways. He's recognizing that what they have is not working.
Yeah.
And he's trying to make it better, and he's trying to do an honorable thing, right? So
yeah.
Nice.
It really broke my heart when he said like that he hates the gods for making him the way that he is, which I believe is an allusion to his sexuality and the fact that he has no interest in women and therefore doing his duty in this family has been challenging for him. And the fact that Rhaenyra immediately is like, no, like she like reassures him and gives him and like validates his experience and his life in a way that I really appreciated, especially watching it the first time, knowing what happens to him. Starting with this conversation, the whole rest of the episode was just like a roller coaster of emotions for me of like we went from this really like sweet moment to then like when Rhaenyra is talking to Daemon and I was like, oh no.
Well, okay, so we should explain that in the books, Laenor dies mysteriously and it's not clear exactly how he dies. Is that right?
In the books, it's just said that Carl, like that him and Carl, who had been like acquaintances for some time, that they got into a fight in public and Carl stabbed Laenor to death. And it's kind of like written off as like we're not really sure why that happened or like what escalated to what. It's just known that like he was killed tragically.
Right. And then you're like, and you're watching this, you're like, oh my gosh, they're going to make Rhaenyra the one responsible for it. And then a flip again at the end where it's like, oh my gosh, she's actually not responsible for it, or she is, but he's not dead,
Yeah.
So
like I thought, because you've already identified it. I'm pretty pro Rhaenyra throughout most of this show so far. I've really kind of been in lockstep with understanding, even when she does things that are detrimental to others or whatever, I've been sort of like, I get why she's doing this and I don't really fault her for it necessarily. This was the first time where I was like, oh no, they're making me they're turning me on Rhaenyra. I was like, I can't justify this. Like, Laenor has truly done nothing wrong. He just had that really sweet conversation with her where he recommitted to their marriage, and like I was like, I was kind of like, of course, Daemon and Rhaenyra are gonna conspire together to murder this innocent man so that they can marry. Like, yeah, sure, that tracks. But I was like, I was grieving my loss of my pro Rhaenyra stance as this scene went on, and then boom, surprise, he's alive. And it's fine. And I can continue being pro Rhaenyra because, in fact, this is a very wonderful character development for her of like ensuring a like safe, protected passage for him to go like live his life where he maybe doesn't have to sit around and just feel ashamed of who he is constantly. Like, I thought that was a really great thing. And I really enjoyed the little switcheroo game that the writers played with book readers in this example, because it's hard to surprise us. But we were surprised, and it's very fun when that happens.
As a show watcher only, I was not really surprised, because they give you like all these hints about what's going to happen. I mean, it's a really cool montage when she says, when Daemon says, we can't marry unless Laenor is dead. And she's like, I know. And then you see Daemon killing some random guy. So it's like, okay, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Then you see the Laenor and Carl fight, and then a body emerge from the ashes who you cannot identify. And it's like, oh, that's clearly not Laenor. Like, right from that point, it's like, that's not Laenor, because that's kind of how TV shows and films do this kind of reveal. So still very well done when he gets on the boat at the end. It's like a cool reveal. He takes off the hood. You see it's him. It's a beautiful shot of them on the boat together. But I just thought it was like a pretty well executed scene. I wasn't as head faked multiple times as you were. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool, Kim, that like this is like an inverse. Like usually it's the show watchers being shocked, and for once it's like the book readers that were really taken aback. So that's a nice reverse of the dynamic there.
Yeah,
so.
And in a positive way, right? Because like in last episode, it was a little bit of a reveal to book readers that Larys Strong was the one who orchestrated the fire and killed them. But it's like that's a tragic reveal. That's a like, oh god, this person's worse than I thought reveal. Whereas this was like, oh, this person's better than I thought reveal of like Rhaenyra and Daemon didn't go for the straight murder that they clearly probably could have pulled off, given that like
yeah. I mean, it's also a character that we've gotten to know over like 6 episodes, as opposed to some guy who showed up for 5-10 minutes one time. Like,
true.
I think that was my whole point with the Larys thing last episode, was like, the turn doesn't mean that much if you don't even know who the character was or was supposed to be prior to that.
Right. But us thinking that Rhaenyra, who we've seen grow up, who we've seen,
this could have been when she broke bad. This could have been like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And it is very telling that the writers chose to have it go that way. Again, just kind of making it more clear that the show's bird's eye view of what happened during this period of Targaryen history is much more empathetic towards Rhaenyra than the accounts that we got in Fire and Blood.
The only other things to mention about what happened this episode, there's a Larys Alicent scene where, to quote another, was I quoting Coen Brothers movie earlier? But to quote The Big Lebowski, or to refer to The Big Lebowski, lots of Walter Sobchak energy coming out of Sir Larys in this scene. He's like, are you sure? Walter Sobchak in The Big Lebowski was like, I could get you a toe by 2 o'clock with nail polish on it. And Larys is like, are you sure you don't want you don't want me to get that eye for you? I could totally get that eye for you, like easily. It's not even, it would be no skin off my back. It's just a piece of cake. And she's like, no, that's quite all right. I'm good. No eye necessary.
Yeah. She's learned that she has to be very clear.
Yes, exactly.
No innuendos here about what I wish might happen. Yeah. Please back off.
We see Rhaenyra and Daemon marry, basically, right? They get married, and it's a small ceremony. It's unclear to me how much time has passed in the last like 5 minutes of this episode. Because they have to kill Laenor. They have to like engineer that whole stunt.
Right. So that's like an evening overnight.
At least, Kim. I mean,
right.
He has that conversation with Carl, like, and then they need to like bury Laenor, and then they get married. So I feel like they're like really fast forwarding past a bunch of developments there's probably like a week goes by or so, at least a week goes by in the last few minutes of the episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts on the wedding. We've seen a couple weddings in Game of Thrones universe. This is one that seems to be A, consensual, and B, not have a actual tragedy associated with it, only a theorized tragedy.
Yeah.
So that's a positive points right there.
Yeah. More blood than I'm used to in mouths for weddings. It was a new thing. Yeah. The thing that popped in my head
is that it's like a Targaryen touch, maybe, or
I'm guessing that this is what a traditional Targaryen or High Valyrian wedding ceremony looks like, seems like. Yeah, I thought it was like, I was like, okay, great, here we go. Daemon and Rhaenyra are finally together. Their kids look a little like nonplussed by the situation. I'm wondering how exactly they explained that to the children.
Right.
We'll see.
Or maybe not, depending on how quickly these time jumps keep happening. But yes,
true. Yeah, I thought it was like somewhat romantic. I love Emma Darcy. I think that they have such a physical, like their physical
good chemistry.
Yeah, like good hand touching with Matt Smith. Like they're good. They have very good believable, like tactile. I feel a closeness to you, and so watching them in that wedding ceremony, like literally sharing the blood off of their mouths with one another and stuff. I was like,
they like slice their hands open and like hold hands and stuff like that too.
Yeah, which I'm again, everybody harps on about the fact that like Targaryen blood is very important for aligning people, but it also reminded me of like how Dany like the Dothraki customs that Daenerys absorbs in Game of Thrones, and she refers to her most trusted advisors and like protectors as blood of my blood, and I was like, obviously this isn't a Dothraki reference in this wedding, but I was like, yeah, they're going pretty heavy on the symbolism of like, we are literally like uniting our blood, and that bond is going to be stronger than any other type of political alliance that might happen.
One of the points that was brought up in the space this week was that that Laenor is being very cruel to his parents because they've just lost their daughter Laena. They are now losing their only other child, and he's kind of inflicting that on them. And that is very unfortunate. And I can't imagine they would be really upset by that, because at this point they have no relatives, like no descendants by blood at this point. Is that right? Or
they have their granddaughters.
Daemon's children. That's right.
Right. Okay. So like they have their granddaughters, but they established in that scene that we talked about between Rhaenys and Corlys that like Rhaenys feels very distraught by the fact that Daemon basically has control over the last of their blood. So even that is probably a very
tenuous,
minimal comfort. And it is kind of like, it's awful that they're mourning his death, especially like such a kind of like horrible, tragic, cold-blooded murder, the way that they staged it. But I'm also like, I don't believe that Laenor would. It seemed his position as king consort seemed very untenable, given the rumors that are swirling around, given the fact that he is a closeted gay man. Like, I think that he was going to be in danger either way, and it's like he made the choice to just get it over with, as opposed to dragging out what I'm sure would be, I don't know, worse implications of him trying to continue the facade of being Rhaenyra's husband.
Indeed. All right. Well, those are our thoughts on season 1, episode 7 of House of the Dragon, Driftmark. And again, you can always find more episodes of this podcast at acastofkings.com, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, at Acast of Kings. Email us at acastofkings@gmail.com as well. Kim, any other thoughts as we close out this week?
Go be nice to each other. People of the world. That's all.
My friend Jeff, who I played the clip from earlier, his bafflement at the events of last episode. He has a thing he likes to say at the end of his podcast, think about what you put out into the world and try to make it a better place. So I always appreciate that. Anyway, Thanks for listening to A Cast of Kings. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, see you later. Thanks for watching that video from A Cast of Kings. To get the podcast version of the show, go to acastofkings.com. A Cast of Kings is part of the Decoding TV podcast network. Check out the flagship podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Get cool bonuses at decodingtv.com. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more videos.